Hoop Heads podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
This is in any walk of life. There is no substitute for working hard. And if you have, if you don't have people who work hard, you're never going to maximize your potential. Never, never, never.
Phil Schmook has coached varsity basketball since 1986. His coaching stops have included Richmond Hts, Amherst Steele, Maple Heights, and his current position at Twinsburg High School. In each place, he has inherited a struggling program and completely changed the culture. Schmook has developed each program from the ground up, working with the youth players all the way up through the varsity. Coach Schmook's teams have won over 67% of their games, with numerous players moving on to play at the collegiate level, including Division I. Schmook's teams have won 24 sectional championships. He has coached in numerous high school all-star games while winning Coach of the Year awards in the Lake Erie League and Chagrin Valley Conference. He has also earned numerous Coach of the Year awards in the Western Reserve Coaches and Greater Cleveland Coaches Association. He also earned coaches awards through the AP and other media outlets. All these awards can be directly related to the outstanding young men that he has coached through the years. Coach Schmook has also been involved with AAU basketball for over 15 years. Through the Team Berea sports program, his teams have been very successful, including the winning of an AAU national championship. Many of the players in this program have played at the next level at schools such as Ohio State, West Virginia, Northwestern, and Michigan State. I had the pleasure of coaching with Phil at Richmond Hts High School for 13 seasons, and I can honestly say from an insider's perspective that he's one of the very best high school coaches out there. Please get ready to learn from my longtime friend and colleague, Coach Phil Schmook from Twinsburg High School.
Hello and welcome to the Hoop Heads podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel. Today we are very privileged to have a great friend of mine who I had the privilege of coaching for 13 years at Richmond Hts High School, who is currently the Twinsburg Tigers head varsity basketball coach, Mr. Phil Schmook. Phil, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks. Glad to be here. Glad to be here. I'm just glad you consider me a friend.
Hey, we've been around. We've been with each other for such a long time. If we were enemies, that wouldn't be good. So, definitely.
Right, not at
all. Let's start out, Phil. Go back to your childhood, growing up in Parma and getting yourself into the game of basketball. What was it about the game that really drew you in for the first time?
I think a couple things drew me into it. First and foremost, you can practice it by yourself, and you can be whoever you wanted to be in your backyard. You could be, you could put yourself to be in the NBA. You could put yourself playing for Notre Dame. It was you and a basket, a ball, and you always won. You always hit the game-ending shot. It was just tremendous and fun. I think one of the other things that drew me to basketball, and I still like today, is that, in baseball, the coach gives you the bunt sign, you have to bunt. The quarterback calls 32 dive right, he's handing it off, and you got to go through the two-hole. But in basketball, I don't care what play is called, it always comes down to you as a player get an option to make a basketball play and make a read. So from that standpoint, I think that's fun. I mean, I think even though I coach, I'm going to make this comment. There's less coaching, in my opinion, while the game of basketball is being played. Thus, it gives you a chance to be creative, yourself. I love that piece. I think I love it. It's just a sport, where you're competing all the time. I think another thing about basketball that I as a kid I remember, it told you about, when you play basketball with people, you learn a lot about who they are. You find out what guys are selfish. You find out what guys put the team ahead of themselves. You find out who understands what a role is, who wants to win, who wants to lose. I think that all comes out in basketball, and those are the things that attracted me, more than anything else.
Yeah, I think you can tell I know you and I have had this conversation many times, but you can tell within 3 minutes of stepping on the court with somebody in a pickup game, whether or not you want them on your team,
whether you want them on their
or
team,
whether or not you want to even talk to them off the court,
Right.
For 2 seconds based on the fact of how they play. There's just some guys that drive you crazy immediately when they play.
I think Mike and I talked about this on one podcast where, like, I'll go to the gym and see who's about to get on the court, and I know this guy, and I don't want to play on his team. I was like, oh man, I got to stretch. I got to not play this game because I don't want anything to do with being on that guy's team at all.
Right. See, I think that's something. See, that's another thing to me that attracts me to basketball, because once again, when just exactly what you said, I'd rather basketball allows you or enables you to find guys that understand a common goal, and whether it's a pickup game, whether it's a high school game, whether it's college, and because of that, it just everything flows about it. And when guys don't want to do that, you don't want to be near them. You don't want to hang out with them. You don't even want to sit at a table with them. I think that's something about basketball too. That's just tremendous. I mean, it just gives you opportunity. I mean, and here's another thing about the game of basketball. Think about this next time you're going somewhere. It's if you really want to play, you need to be decent at all parts of it. I know there are guys who are great specialists, like shooters in the NBA and different things. But if you're playing with other guys, I mean, guys that can play the game, that can do a lot of different things, it just enhances everything you do. And I think you see that just with people in general. Basketball is just a great game. I mean, Mike, we talked about it so many times. Think about our times at Richmond Heights together. I mean, you and I would sit there in the locker room. We would look around, or after we'd talk about maybe what our team looked like skill-wise, talent-wise. But we knew every time we took the floor with the young men that we had, and the way you and I developed those guys, not just physically, but the mental aspect of it, we knew our kids were going to put us in a position to win, and we knew that. And that's something I love about basketball. I just love that aspect,
So how do you think that, if you go back to, again, the time when we were young, it seemed like there was much more positional certainty, for lack of a better word, where you had the big kid who, all he does is post up, and you got the point guard who maybe doesn't look to score but just distributes the ball, and then you got your shooter. Whereas now I think kids and players have developed, just like what you were talking about. When you go to a playground, you want to play with guys who are all-around players. I think kids today, all across the spectrum, have developed a wider range of skill set. Would you agree with that or not?
Oh, I completely agree. I think today, I think there's good and bad to that too, though. Okay, but I think one that definitely there's a better skill set with many more kids today than when we were growing up. You think about when we were growing up, that there was the kid who maybe was a kid who was a football kid, and he knew he was a football player. When he stepped on the basketball court, all he did, he wasn't very skilled, this kid, but all he wanted to do was rebound the ball, bang bodies down low, rebound the ball, do those type of things. I don't know if those kids exist anymore. You know what I mean? From the standpoint of nowadays, every kid wants to handle the ball. Every kid wants to shoot the three. Every kid wants to be the guy that the plays run for them at the end of the game. There's a lot of good to that. But there's also a piece where I think what it does there is it creates a little more selfishness, and it creates a kid that can be tougher to coach. He might be better skilled, but it becomes more of a challenge to take that kid and put him into a team aspect.
Yeah, it's harder to find, I think, role players is what you're saying. I think because so many kids spend so much time, whether it's working with a private individual coach, or whether they're playing on multiple AAU teams or whatever else they may be doing, because there's so many opportunities out there for kids to get better. There's more opportunity now than there was when you and I were playing, simply because, again, you and I had to do it on our own. We had to go and find a game. We had to pick up the ball and go in the basement or go on the driveway. Whereas kids today, you can walk out your front door and run into somebody who's a skills trainer, or run into somebody who has an AAU program. And so as a result of that, I think kids have developed. I know for a fact that kids today, handle the ball so much better. Again, if we talk about the depth of kids, like the 15th player on a varsity team today is a much better has much better all-around skills than the 15th player on a varsity team in 1985. But
absolutely.
But to your point, now that 15th kid doesn't think he should be the 15th kid and doesn't necessarily want to fit a role of, the banger who rebounds inside, or the kid who, keeps the ball moving, or this kid's a defender. Everybody kind of wants to be the man. And I think from a coaching standpoint, that's got to make it more difficult.
Oh, I think it becomes very difficult, and I think that's one of the biggest. Well, I think you can take that mindset of the kids are definitely better skilled and et cetera. But you take that same mindset now, and when it's not working out somewhere, they want to transfer. You look at Division I. Someone told me that there is over 1,000 Division I transfers coming up this year in college basketball, and a lot of that has to do with is because kids are so skilled. They think of themselves as very good, but they still end up going to places where they're still not good enough to play. But because of the skill level, they'll be able to find somewhere. It's like this too. Think of this, Mike. Today, how many times? Okay, great example. Strongsville, corner of 42 and 82. You go back in our times, those courts were packed, outdoor courts with people traveling to play. Up in the Parma area, people would come from all over to play at a place called Forestwood. Today, look at kids. How many young players today go to a outdoor court?
Yeah, we talked about this on the we talked to a coach from Arkansas last night, Brad Stamps, and we had that same conversation that kids just don't, you tell them you're playing outside and they look at you like they can't even understand. What do you mean you're playing outside? Like it might rain, or there's wind, or there could be, gravel on the court, and they look at you like you're crazy.
Yeah.
Right. My knees are going to hurt.
I've said it before, like we were in the summertime, a bunch of my friends and I go up and play at a court right in Strongsville here. It's actually a court that I played on when I was a kid. And I think in the 3 or 4 years that we've ever played on it, we may have seen like a total of 6 kids playing on it on a Saturday morning at 10 a.m. So it's crazy to me that these kids don't play at all outside.
And here's my thing. Here's my question for you on this, Phil. And I don't know, trying to get your opinion on it. Do you think? So when I look at how you and I grew up playing, and we were playing not only against kids our own age, kids in our neighborhood, but you were playing against older kids. You were playing against a lot of times adults when you were 13, 14, 15 years old. And so you had to learn some of the proverbial tricks of the trade, how to use your body, how to stand up for yourself, how to maneuver around somebody who was a lot bigger than you, how to get your shot off and be able to play with and have confidence to play with players that were older. And nowadays, kids only play with an official, a coach, their dad in the stands, in a gym. And it just seems like from a coaching standpoint that it would be much more difficult to coach those kids because they just don't have the same level of sophistication in terms of dealing with other people that kids in our era did, which I think leads to your point of the transfers and all that stuff, is that nobody wants to sit down and fight through adversity when things aren't perfectly laid out for them.
Right. It's like this. How many times today do you have to tell the kid sometimes, a smaller kid, how do you get your shot off against someone bigger? Today, trainers are creating drills to create that type of situation where you're driving to the basket. You got to learn how to get the ball off, how to shoot maybe go up off the wrong foot just to get it off, because you're never facing that. So trainers now, coaches, we're coming up with different ways to teach kids, the things that we learned on our own. I mean, when you drove into the basket and an older guy, a kid 5-6 years older than you, is going to bump you, bang you, he's going to have a big wingspan on you. You learned how to step underneath them, shot fake on your own, go off the wrong foot, hesitate, do something crafty. Today, how many times on their own do they see that? They don't, because if they're a solid athlete and a solid player, they're going against kids that they're better than probably 75% of the time.
Yeah, with everybody playing, again, AAU has become so watered down where everybody is playing it that, the original intent, or the way it used to be, where you had only the best players in a particular area that were playing, that doesn't exist. So again, a lot of times, you go to these AAU tournaments, like you said, to your point, if you have a good team or you're a good player, a lot of times you're playing 2, 3, 4 games against competition that's really not very good until you get to maybe some of the higher level teams, as you get into your bracket play. So it's a challenge out there. I mean, I can only imagine, and obviously I haven't coached in a high school setting here for a few years, but it just seems to me that you're always fighting this mentality with kids and parents that they're entitled to something, whatever that something is, whether it's a spot on the team, whether it's a starting position, whether it's the number of shots that they get, whether it's a scholarship offer that a coach is supposed to get for them. I think because they've spent a lot of money on their kids, to play basketball as opposed to just going up to the courts, and they've just invested so much time into it that I think a lot of people have this entitlement mentality that's got to make coaching high school basketball today as difficult as it's ever been.
Oh, I think so. What you just said reminds me of, there's a piece I came across in a magazine about a year ago. It dealt with Villanova. With the basketball. It talked about basketball now has become, it used to be called a city game. And there was an article that said basketball has been suburbanized. And what in essence it's saying is nowadays, starting at age 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, the players that have the resources available to them, the better trainers, the better programs, the opportunity to play, the opportunity to travel, the opportunity to compete against others, that group gets selected earlier. And what it does is they're the ones that get the benefit of the coaching. They're the ones who get the benefit of the special training, the special play. And a young man who doesn't have the economic availability, he's going to get left behind. And I started thinking about that. And if you really look at it, it's happened. It's happened. I mean, look at all the guys coming up now. Everyone playing the best players. How many guys can you think of that don't play in programs anymore? You don't hear about a guy. He's playing AAU somewhere. He's playing a top program, and without that, their chances of making it aren't as great.
Yeah, this was actually something we talked about. I coach in Olmsted Falls. I coach a middle school team, and we were talking with the head varsity coach. I coach girls and boys, but it was the head girls coach. And today we were talking about how, a lot of these smaller districts, such as like North Ridgeville or a few others that we play in the SWC, they don't have the strong youth programs because of the AAU, the lack of having AAU teams. And those kids aren't getting the experiences that the kids in our district and Avon Lake and other places in our area that are getting lots of more time playing with those coaches and things, because it's about the haves and the have-nots almost, I think, a lot of times, and it's really, really rough for these kids that want to play basketball, but there's just not the opportunity to do so.
Well, I'll go ahead and I'll take this point on. I've noticed this, and I didn't used to believe this, but as time has went on, I've noticed this. Even players that aren't as gifted athletically and maybe aren't as gifted even skill-wise, they haven't developed their skills, if they play year-round, if they play in a solid AAU programs, and I'm not talking about having to win games, but they're playing a program where they're receiving quality coaching, they're able to get in a gym, they're able to work with others, those kids end up being better players than other guys who might be better skilled and better athletes at times, because they've played the game, they understand it. Hey, I'll give you a great example. I came from tonight. We had open gym tonight up at Twinsburg, and I'm watching both courts being played. And as I'm watching, what's going through my mind isn't the kid who drives past someone and scores, because open gym, there's no real defense being played. It's how many young men catch the ball and will reverse the ball? How many guys will know when it's a 3-on-1 and they're running the floor, or a 4-on-2, that someone will know to run the floor, dive to the basket, to open up space for somebody on the wing? Those are the things that you learn through organized basketball. I don't think they learn it as much anymore on their own, because have you ever noticed when you see sometimes kids playing on their own and it's full court game, sometimes, I'm going to tell you what, 5 of the 10 kids don't cross half court, And so I think that's part of it. I think it's just become a mentality that we need to have that. I'm a big fan of AAU. I'm a big believer, and there's a lot of high school coaches who don't like it. I like it. I think the problem sometimes with AAU is that you'll have a young man who's part of your high school program, and he wants to be the point guard for you. But there's a kid who's way better than him at his own school. And so you want this kid he could play the 2 for you, though. He can handle the ball. He's a decent shooter. But in the summertime, his AAU coach is still having him handle the ball as a point guard. And you're thinking, you're not going to play for us there. So, work on this. That's my only time with AAU where I think it gets negative, is when you got a kid who he's going to play for you, and maybe you need him to score the ball more, but he plays on an AAU team that's a great AAU team, and he rarely sees the ball. Is he getting better from that? I don't know. That's my only concern there.
Yeah, we've talked to a couple other coaches about this particular thing, and that is there a way that we can sort of get the communication between, how do you feel the communication is between high school coaches and AAU coaches? So when you have players from your program today at Twinsburg, and they go in the summertime and they're playing for, again, AAU Team X, do you ever get an opportunity to talk to those AAU coaches? Do any of those AAU coaches reach out to you and say, hey, coach, what can I work on, with this player that he can bring back to Twinsburg next year and really fit into his role of what you see him doing, or does that not happen at all?
I think it happens, Mike. I think it happens when you have a high school coach who's involved in his program, who wants to know where his kids are playing AAU and who they're playing with. And I'll try to go ahead and I'll find out who my guys are playing with. I'll try to communicate with them. I think that does happen. But I also think what's happening a little bit sometimes with AAU, and I think this happens more on the eastern side of Carga County, and that way, I think that some of the AAU programs have become places where those guys coaching them are taking kids and trying to get them to transfer to other schools. I think that becomes a problem with some coaches. I think coaches that aren't as involved, I think sometimes they might lose some kids that way. But I think communication happens. I think with quality, it's the same thing, Mike. It comes down to quality people.
Right, for sure. Yep, for sure.
You see it at youth basketball, travel league basketball. Why do some travel programs have 4th, 5th, 6th grade teams where their kids are, learning and they're getting better and you see improvement, and other communities have travel teams that you see those kids aren't making as much growth. The growth isn't occurring, and you see it's all about, hey, we were 36-4 this year, but those kids didn't get better. So I think it's the same with AAU and travel. It depends upon what people are involved.
How hard is that to fight? I guess I'm talking from a youth level. How hard is it to fight the mentality with parents who just want to see that sparkling 36-4 record that you mentioned, but they're not really looking at the overall picture, which is, look, your kid's in 4th grade. It doesn't really matter that they went 36-4. What matters is that they're being taught the fundamentals of the game. They're not sitting in a 2-3 zone. They're being taught how to play man-to-man defense. They're not, just putting the biggest kid on the block with his back to the basket, just standing there. They're working on skill development, and they're working on, more than just basketball. They're trying to develop kids as leaders and teammates and all those things. And I think one of the biggest problems that I see in the space that I'm in all the time is just the lack of education that parents have in terms of what a quality program looks like. And that goes to your other point, as kids get older, then somebody whispers in their ear, hey, you should come to program X instead of staying at your school where you are now. And because parents and kids just aren't aware of what the developmental process looks like and what the landscape should be, they end up making a lot of bad decisions as a result of that. So do you think that how can we educate? How can we get that word out to parents? How can we help parents to understand what the development process should look like when the kids are young?
Well, I think first of all, Mike, and this is, and maybe someone's going to say that I'm biased, but I personally believe that coaching basketball is one of the most difficult. It's one of the most difficult sports to find youth coaches in, and the reason why I say that, I think that I don't think there's as many people out there that know basketball as well as they seem to know baseball and football. I think you have no problem finding guys that, have a pretty good grasp of youth football, youth baseball. But I think when it comes to basketball, I think there's a lot of coaches out there who don't know as well. They don't see everything that we just talked about.
Do you think that's because of what you described earlier, where you talking about, baseball, we got, all right, hey, you're going to throw the curveball, or hey, we're putting a bunt sign on, and football, we're handing off to the running back and he's going through the two gap or whatever the case might be. Whereas basketball, you have to have, there's a lot more variety, right? Exactly.
I mean, it comes down to and you can run someplace, some kid coming off a double screen, and if he catches the basketball, and that guy closes out on him, he's got to be able to make a read on him. He's got to be able to put the ball in his hand and go by him, make a decision, jump stop, make a pass, and I think that is part of it. I always think of this when I think of the youth basketball, because that's the one that kills me. I'll go out and I'll see, I'll be around, I'll see some travel games, and I've been out of the travel a while since my kids played. But I always remember this, and I try to get this point across to our travel coaches in Twinsburg, and I did it when I was at Maple. We started our youth programs there. I used to tell my son, my oldest son, when he played for us, he would be handling the ball for us in these little youth YMCA games, and he was driving by and able to score. And I would say to my son, listen, when you bring the ball up the floor, your job as you do that, drop the ball to this kid, let him score. And I remember my son is like a 6 and 7-year-old kid saying, Dad, he doesn't catch the ball. Dad, he's going to miss it. And my response was, well, at some point in time, somebody is going to catch that ball and someone is going to make that shot. So you need to keep doing what you should do to make yourself better, and don't worry about those other guys. Now, I was coaching it on Sunday. I didn't care if we won or lost. I didn't care if we threw the ball to a kid, he got to the block, it went through his hands and rolled out of bounds. I wanted the kid to learn how to play.
Yeah. And now, by the way, I'm gonna interrupt your story, because what you just said, the advice that you gave Anthony, is the best piece of advice that I ever received from my dad. He said basically the same thing, not in the exact same words, but I would get frustrated same way. I'd make a pass and it would go flying out of bounds, or the kid, bounce off a kid's head or whatever. And my dad, again, frustration on my part. And I still can remember, I remember exactly where I was standing when my dad said this to me, and he's like, keep throwing those passes. It doesn't matter how many times they go out of bounds. Eventually, you're going to play with guys who are going to catch the ball. And
right.
It's just, and it would have been very easy for you or for my dad or for any coach that was dealing with a player who was good at those levels to say, yeah, don't pass to that kid. Shoot the ball. We got a much better chance to win. But you think about the long-term development of me as a player or of Anthony as a player. And again, that's where, to your point, coaches need to take the long view of, hey, I'm trying to develop a kid for the long term as opposed to I'm trying to win this one game.
And I think that's where the disconnect happens with a lot of the AAU teams, because I don't think they're thinking about now. They're not most of the time. I mean, I shouldn't say most of the time, but I think a lot of the time they're thinking about now, because they want that, going back to what we said earlier, that sparkling 36-4 record, because that's what the parents want. They don't think about the kid, this 4th grade kid that's out here playing AAU basketball, what he or she's going to be doing in 4 or 5 years playing the middle school and high school level, unless that the varsity coach has had some contact like we talked about before.
Right. Well, here's the other one. Think about this, though, too. Some of these guys, and I don't blame these parents, they're coaching these teams, and here's the killer. They might be doing a great job, and when they don't go 36-4, they've got 5, 6 other parents on their team who are complaining to the head of their travel association that this guy's got to go. And so you end up having, think about this, grown adults who really know what to do, who do bring a quality aspect to it, yet they're probably thinking to themselves too, my God, if we don't do okay, they're going to run me out of here. And I know that if I still can stay here and help these kids, they're going to get more with me than they would with someone else they bring in. I think it's.
So talk about what you did with your kids with travel basketball and AAU, because I think there's a lesson to be learned from how you went about approaching the situation, which was far different, than a lot of people don't have the opportunity to do what you did. But I think there's a lesson to be learned from what you did with your kids and your team as you were bringing them up through, the basketball system as it was.
I'll tell you exactly, and I've shared this with some people that I knew going through it. What I did is that we live in Parma here, and they've never had any travel basketball teams. So my son played when Anthony was when he was in first grade. We played in the 3rd and 4th grade league of Parma. We kind of lied and said he was in 3rd grade. So we play in a league, and before they're starting to play, they're lining the kids up. And they're telling you have to guard each other. And I'm looking, and then the other coaches in the other team are moving guys around. And I'm thinking, what are they doing? And so I kind of just realized, my God, this isn't getting anyone better. They wouldn't let you help on the ball. And I said, I got to find a better way. So what I did is I started my own travel team here in Parma. And what I did is I went ahead and handed out flyers, put together a team. I was fortunate they didn't have a travel. But I only limited a team to 7 guys. And I did that because then I told all the parents, I have 7 kids. We're going to play, and you're going to play a lot. Here's what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. I would also tell everyone, I don't have to answer to anyone else. If you don't like what's going on, just pull your kid. There's no need to complain to me. Just pull them. So I was able to do that with those kids, and I treated my teams. We started in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade, and I treated those kids. I ran practices like I did if they were in junior high or high school in regard to expectations. I did the same type of massive, per se, some of the full court things that I was doing with our high school kids when we were at Richmond there. But of course, I just did skill. We never ran, Mike. We didn't have a bunch of plays, okay? We didn't have any of that. We said make basketball plays. We taught them how to screen. We taught them how to pass and cut. We told them how to move the ball. And we did those things to make them better. We played. Mike, now here's something that might differ. We played a lot of games. I can still remember. I always laugh about it now. But we would play on Saturday in a league, play 2 games there, and we played in our Sunday league. We played in tournaments, played tons of games, and it was all about teaching them, playing, and doing those things. And people would ask me, well, why don't you get more kids? Why don't you do this? And my response always was, no, the only way they're getting better is to play. And so we did those things. And then, the AAU season came up, and my son Anthony was playing with this great program with Team Berea Sports. And I would drop them off all the time for practice and this and that. And then I'd go my own way and pick them up an hour and a half later. Well, the next one is in his 2nd year. My son Joey was trying out for the team. So they knew me. They knew I'd coach high school. They knew that I was going to all the tournaments. So they said, do you want to coach it? And I remember I really didn't want to, but I said, okay. And I did it, and I did the same thing. Told those parents, listen, here's what we're doing. And I will tell you, though, Mike, I was blessed. From that team, I mean, Isa Ahmad, who's playing over in West Virginia. He played with us. The two Dowell brothers, who are, Michigan State starting in the secondary at Michigan State. I mean, those guys, they're playing with me. I had some of the best players. And what I always remember about it is all we did was teach them how to play and continually teach them. We didn't run a bunch of different things. I skilled them. I taught them lessons, how to do this, how to go. And the other piece to me that I think was very important with development of every kid on that team is no one was better than anyone else in regard to how they were coached. And the expectations were the same. And I will tell you, I still talk to those same kids that play for us. I still see their parents. And I think about all those things. But I didn't care. There was no part of me, Mike, that cared about winning. We won a lot. I didn't care about it. All I cared about was getting them better and playing time. So I think that's something. I mean, I was fortunate. I mean, I didn't have to worry about parents complaining. I didn't have to worry about kids not wanting to play. And if I had to do it again, I recommend anyone get involved with your son's teams. If you want to play AU basketball and basketball and you can't find a program that fits your son, then go ahead and look to start a team. If you know the game, find the pieces that you need, and I think it'll be productive. I think those are the things you do.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's a whole lot of things to pull out of what you were able to do with your sons. And the one thing that jumps out at me first is, and I'm sure you experienced this, and I know I've experienced it. My son's now going to be in 7th grade. And again, like my teams have never been super talented, and we're a 500. We've been a 500 outfit at best as we've gone through this this elementary school sort of years with the program, whether it was travel or AAU. But I know one of the things that now is I watch the kids that I've coached over the years, and I see them, for example, in an open gym setting, and they're just playing some pickup basketball with other kids. And the thing that jumps out at me more than anything is just the fact that the kids that I've coached, going back to something that you said earlier, they just understand how to play. So they know I got to set a screen here, and they know how to reverse pivot and roll to the basket. They know that when I go down and I'm coming off a screen, I got to set my guy up. They know that when the ball's on one side of the floor, I got to be in the middle of the court on help side. And there's just so many little things that I see kids that weren't coached properly, that have no idea what they're supposed to be doing. And again, the kids I coached, it's not necessarily that they were super talented, and I'm not saying they're going to end up at any particular place or whatever, but I do know that any kid that played for me at this youth level is going to have been given an understanding of the right way to play the game. And I think that's one thing that you were able to impart to the kids that you coach. And then the second thing that I heard you say, which I think is a tremendous point for any coach or parent that's out there listening, is that when you went into this whole situation, the first thing you did before you did anything else was you communicated to the parents what the expectations were for the team. And I think that's something that especially young coaches, I think, can learn from, because a lot of times coaches go into it and they're like, my ways, I know what I'm doing and I don't necessarily have to communicate to parents. But you head off so many problems when you say, look, we're going to have 7 kids. Your kid's going to get to play a lot. He's going to be coached equally just like everybody else. And if you don't like what's happening, then you can make another decision. But you're knowing up front what you're getting into. And I think those are two just tremendously important points. Teaching them the right way to play and then communicating with the people that you're interacting with are two really important things.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, Mike, the same thing I think happens at the high school level and the junior high level, middle school when you're coaching. I think you talk about not only with your parents laying out the expectations that you have, explaining what the parameters are. The group's gonna function within, so they hear it, and then they can decide. Are we going to be a part of this program and support it? Or do we not want to be a part of this program, and then we're away? And I think it's the same way with the players you have. in the 7th grade teams, the 8th grade team, your freshman, JV, and varsity, that I think if you constantly communicate with those kids throughout the year, they're not going to agree with everything you say, but if you continually update them on this is what we're doing, this is why we do it. See, and I think that's another thing when you talk about expectations with people and when you're making decisions, I think you need to tell the people why also. Like, well, this is why we do this. And now players know, parents know, expectations are there. It's never going to eliminate every problem, but it does give you a better opportunity for success. And at least everybody knows where you're at. And I think that's for me, coaching for many years, I think the biggest thing that I like to do with anyone I'm involved with is let them know what they're getting into. Yeah. And then you make the choice what you want to do.
Yeah, I think that's one really nice thing that we have going in Olmsted Falls. Like, we both the varsity coaches are really like in tune with what we're doing, and we're in tune with what they're doing. And I think like by the time the kids get to high school, as long as you've been doing what you're doing in middle school, they know the expectations because we're using the same terminology. We're following the same protocols. The practice plans are not obviously the same for middle school and high school, but a lot of it is very consistent. And I think that's really important to have that kind of like level of consistency between the middle school and the high school programs, because if kids get used to it by 7th and 8th grade, they know what's coming in 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, and the likelihood of them sticking it out and playing basketball all the way through their high school career is greater.
So let's piggyback on.
Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
So let's piggyback on what Jason just said and think back to our time at Richmond Heights, because what he's talking about is building a program from the varsity level on down to the youth level. And I know one of the things that I'll let you speak on it, but one of the things I know that always frustrated us and you in particular was just the lack of being able to get the youth program in Richmond Heights going the way that we would have wanted to get it going, simply because of the factors there. And talk about how that was just a challenge that we faced there.
Well, you said it. I remember because we could never get into their recreation youth basketball program. They loved having that in the one gym on Saturday, having championship day, and we would go in there. Remember, a couple times on Saturday practice from our practice and look at it, and there was no coaching going on for the most part. People were playing a 2-3 zone. It was, someone dribbles a ball across and fires it up. And I remember, Mike, you helping me with a couple guys over at the elementary school. And if you remember, I put them on a couple of my travel basketball teams.
Right.
And they played with me. And I remember thinking, wow, how different it was. And so I think Richmond Heights was, boy, you were fighting. You weren't going to win the battle there with at that time with their youth basketball. But I thought, were able to overcome it at Richmond, because that to me, and until I left Richmond Heights and went to Amherst Steele High School for 1 year, and then Maple and now Twinsburg, I had no idea that other schools didn't do what we did at Richmond. And you think about it, we even got so fortunate, Mike. Remember, I was coaching the 7th grade team, okay? Jason Pop, our JV coach, was the 8th grade coach. And if I remember at Richmond, toward the end, I remember times we had school out 2:30. We would run middle school practice from 2:40 to, I think it was 3:50. And we would have all of us coaches come in there. We'd have some of our players come in and work with our middle school guys, and all we did is skill and teach them the game. And then starting at approximately like 10 to 4 o'clock, we went varsity practice from 4 to 5:30. And you think about that. I do remember, it just was, we were all on the same page.
Yeah, I think that's...
I knew, when Mike Klinzing was down there in our gym at middle school, I didn't need to be around. I knew what Mike was doing. I had so much trust and faith in Mike. I knew Jason Pop was in the same group. I knew Don Gross was on the same page. I knew all of us.
Coach Don, shout out right there. That's a good call.
Yeah. He's still with me. It's everyone was together. But I don't think most schools have that. I think there's a complete breakdown. I don't think there's a correlation between the programs at all. I think that the middle school programs are completely on their own at times. And
just
I don't think they follow what high school does.
Think about how unusual it was that we had the same exact staff, at least from the the high school standpoint. I mean, I know we had some transition in the middle school level, but we had the same exact staff for 13 years. I mean, I just don't believe that happens very often, where three guys are able to build a relationship that works, where everybody is in their role and knows what they're supposed to do and has trust and has belief in what the other guys are doing. I just don't think that happens very often. So we've talked to some other, coaches, and again, one of the things that they've talked about is that, they want their assistants to have trust and to have loyalty with, within their staff. And I think that's one of the things that made what we were able to accomplish, there at Richmond so special, was just the fact that, again, we were all together. We were there for a long time, and we all had each other's backs in all situations. And I think that was just a completely unique opportunity that we had to go about doing it that way. And that's what made the program what it was when we were there.
Yeah, I agree. I think we were, and just to add one more thing on that, I think we were fortunate, besides just all of us trusting each other in coaching. I think we all became friends off the floor. And I think, and I don't think that happens in a lot of places. And I think because of the friendships we developed, I think of the trust we developed, I think of the respect we had for each other, I think that it clicked with the kids even more. I never once at Richmond, I think about this in our years together, not one time can I think of when there was a kid who tried to pit us against each other. And now, I look at moving on in coaching, and I look at other situations, and I've had to address that, because you don't have that same camaraderie within the coaching staff, that same trust. And that's something that, that hurts a program. I mean,
for sure. I mean, it's a great lesson to take away if you're a coach out there listening, that if you can build the kind of staff where that whether you're a head coach and you're talking about your assistants, and that your assistants are there to help you and to help build your program, and they're not angling to get your job, or they're not spending all their time campaigning to try to get a job at another school. Again, not that you don't want your assistants, if they're interested in moving up to be a head coach and take over their own program. Certainly as a head coach, you have a responsibility to mentor those assistant coaches, to get them those opportunities. But I think what we're talking about here is the fact that when you're together with your staff, everybody's on that same page with one goal in mind, which is to maximize the program that you're at the given moment. I think that's something that we did very, very well as a staff. And again, I look back on that time as just some of the best times in my life was sitting in the coach's office after practice or after games, just talking basketball and just trying to figure out, hey, what do we do next? How do we help our kids get better? Right. How do we win the next game? And those moments will never be replaced.
Right. I agree with that. I agree. But the other piece though is, I think, especially talk about young coaches, if they're listening, you've got to, the one thing too that you have to learn to do is to not just be a yes person to coach. And that was something too that we had. I think we had it because of trust. But understand that if you're a varsity coach, I think you should treat your middle school coaches with just as much importance as you do anyone else. And I think if you're a middle school coach, you should feel just as important as the varsity coach and the varsity assistant. And I think when you start doing that, I think that's when programs get built. Because I think I used to say this sometimes. I think, Mike, I used to say this to you. I'd rather be a coach that has a program that wins that you can put yourself in a position to win between 45% and 60% of your games year in and year out every year than a guy that every 4 years wins 20 games, but those other 3 years, I'd rather be that guy who has a program where just, on everyday average talent, you get the most out of them and you compete and you maximize that than be a guy that, the only time you do well is when you have the greatest players alive.
For sure. So let's jump backwards here and talk about when you first knew that you wanted to be a coach. What was it about coaching? Was there a singular moment that you said, wow, this is what I want to do? Was it something that you fell into? And I'm going to be honest, I don't know that I know the answer to this question, so I'm curious to hear how you answer it. But when did you know you wanted to coach?
Well, when I couldn't be 6'6".
When your playing career ended, right? When the playing was over.
When I knew that I wanted to coach, it was a strange situation. I have a younger brother who's 5 years younger than me, and he was playing like t-ball, or a little baseball. And I went with my mom. We had to go to his first day of practice, and the little city apartment. They played during the youth during the day, and so the guy who was there, the umpire of the thing, knew me through me playing through different things, and so he asked, would I help out? And I'm like, okay. I figured I'm going to be there with my mom and him all the time, and I remember doing that. It was John Muir Elementary School, and they played their games, and I enjoyed working. Like I was 13, and I enjoyed working with 7 and 8 year old kids, teaching them how to catch ground balls, how to hit the ball, and just constantly building it up. And I enjoyed it. I liked it. Like I enjoyed going to it. And so then when I, and as I got older, I just kept thinking, I love the game. I love working with kids. I like seeing people get better. And I knew that. And the other aspect is I am very competitive. So I think coaching, it's a way for me to still compete. I enjoy that piece. And I think more than anything, it's just, it hit me every time I was coaching that you could make a difference, not just with the kid on the basketball court, baseball field. You can make an impact when things don't go well for him. You get to learn to read people. When a kid comes into, something I've learned, when a kid comes into a practice and you can see he's down, he's kind of down and out that day, you learn how to deal with that. You learn how to try to pick his spirits up. And I think just the bug of coaching just means that you can help other people get better. And I know I feel better when other people feel better. That's something I think that came across it. So probably the start young age when I was like 12 or 13, I kind of enjoyed making kids better, if that makes any sense.
No, it makes total sense. I mean, I think that a lot of people, I think back to my own experience, and I don't know that I wanted to stay involved in the game, and I just knew maybe not even that I wanted to teach kids or that I, whatever. I think for me, it was just I like being around kids. And I think that's what kind of drove me to get into coaching, to be able to stay involved in the game. So if you think back to your start as a coach, and you think where you started to where you are today at Twinsburg, what are some areas that you feel like you've grown in as a coach, that you've gotten better at over the course of your career, or something that you've learned that, when you were a young coach, you were like, it's not important, and you've learned over time that, hey, that really does have an impact on what I do as a coach?
I think when you first start, I don't think you completely understand how important relationships are as a coach. And when you're young and you're starting off coaching, you're sitting here, you're concentrating on this kid. You're telling him how to get better, and you're basketball. And as you gain experience, you start to realize that one of the most important pieces for you to be successful as a coach is the relationship that you build with the kids. And the truth of the matter is, you have to have a genuine relationship with them. And I think that's something that I've gotten way better at. I didn't understand when I first started coaching, if we had open gym on a Saturday morning and kids who were part of student council were going to help decorate the cafeteria for a dance, I didn't understand that piece. I just would think to myself, are you kidding me? And I think as time goes on, you start to realize they are, you realize once again, they are 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. Okay. So I think you become better at that. I think another thing where I'm way better today, you can't coach with anger. Like, there's times you get upset, you get mad, you get angry. Okay. We all do. It's an emotion. We all have it. If you're coaching and you coach with anger, you're going to be a bad coach. You can't, so that's something I think through and through that I definitely improved in. I think another thing is, as I look back, I've realized this, and this is something that continues to grow, and this is in any walk of life. There is no substitute for working hard. And if you have, if you don't have people who work hard, you're never going to maximize your potential. Never, never, never. So I think those are some of the things that I've learned. The other thing, this is going to sound a strange one, Mike. This is going to sound a goofy one. I've also come to the realization that I don't always like being in a room with all other coaches, if that makes any sense. I'm one of those guys that just because someone else coaches doesn't mean that you necessarily are going to respect them. I'm going to like what they stand for. And, I've learned that just because someone else is a coach doesn't mean that they do a good job. There's a lot of guys out there coaching who don't do a good job. There's a lot of guys who do a great job. I think that's something you'll learn too as the years go on, in your program. So those are some of the things that I've learned.
Do you think that some of that comes out of the competitiveness that you mentioned? Because I'll people that don't know you, I can certainly vouch for the fact that you are by far one of the most competitive people that I've ever met in terms of wanting to get after it and spur on your players and spur on yourself and in cases to really want to win. So you think that competitiveness is one of the things that when you look at a coach who's maybe not doing the things that, again, that you or I might believe in terms of hard work or whatever it might be, do you think that's one of the things that maybe causes you to have less respect for someone?
I think so. I definitely agree with that part. I mean, like I say to myself, like the first time that I don't feel the drive to keep pushing people, to make people better, to maximize what we have, I need to step aside. I think sometimes some guys and gals who are still coaching, they don't want to give it up yet, but their heart isn't in it anymore. You know what I mean? Like they don't want to put the extra in. And I don't blame them, but they also are fearful of stepping aside. I think that sometimes hurts them. From that standpoint.
So when you're putting the hard work in on your program, and somebody comes out and watches Twinsburg play, what are they going to see? What are the pillars of what you're trying to do day in, day out with the Twinsburg program that when people come and see you, they're going to be like, oh, this is what Twinsburg basketball is all about?
I think the biggest thing is that we try to get across to the young men is that we are going to play hard. We're going to play hard, and two, we are going to try to put our players into the best positions for them to be successful. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't do. And here's what I mean by that. I'm willing as a head coach to take all the heat in the world because someone doesn't think that I'm letting this young man play his game. Okay, you can complain, yell, moan. Here's the difference. I know. I see him at practice. I know what he can do and he can't do. And so when I play him in a game and everything we structure on our team, we try to make sure kids never have to do things they can't do in a game. And I think that's something that for us is very well, playing hard, putting him in a right position. I think the other thing that when you come and you see Twinsburg play, you will see this. All our kids are very, very, extremely coachable. And that's something to me that's very valuable. And when I say coachable, what I'm talking about is they feel the same way we do. They're trying to make plays that they can make within their own skill set. And that to me is coachable. That's coachable. And it's them being coachable, not us coaching. It's them being coachable on their own. I think those are the things you see with us because we've been undersized since I came there. I think we were the only program, and I used to tell the kids sometimes we're only a program where I'm as big as half of our post guys. And,
come on, you're 5'11". Come on,
do you have any years of eligibility left?
Yeah, if I did, the coach would definitely get fired when he played me. But no, I think that I think with Twinsburg, the biggest thing, and all the teams we've played, and I think back to our teams at Richmond, I think even my team won 1 year in Amherst and my years at Maple, all the kids, like the coaching staff that we've had has always got the kids to buy in. And I think that's the most important piece is getting kids to buy in. And here's the situation on that is how do you get kids to buy in? It's different from kid to kid, and I think for coaches out there, and if you're unsure, I don't think you can be a guy that comes to kids and tells them this is what we're doing and you need to buy in. I think you need to tell them why you want them to do it, explain it to them, and I think you got a better chance to buy in then. And I think that's something with us when you see Twinsburg. I mean, we had a great year last year there. We won 19 games with our guys last year. We're going to be just as good this year, if not maybe better. And I think about everything, what we've done when I first inherited the program. When I first inherited a couple of years ago, I still remember that. I was there and we were having open gym, my first open gym, Mike, and a couple of players who had played for me at Maple Heights came up. They had played for me 3-4 years earlier. Kids were coming in the gym, and my old kids from Maple kind of looked at me and says, Coach, is this like a freshman, 8th grade open gym? And I'm like, no, this is varsity and JV. And that's how far behind our skill set were at that time. And, we just continue to work at it and just put the time in. And now the kids, their skill sets raised up, a level of play raises up. Basketball is important to them now. And because of those factors, it makes you as a coach look good when, in essence, they're the ones that, they did the work. We just provided a plan of attack.
So year to year, obviously in a high school basketball, you have turnover, players graduating and new players coming in. How do you do two things? One, how do you build that culture so the kids who are new to your program, or in the case of when you inherit a program, how do you get the kids that are coming into the program to understand what the culture is that you want? And then number two, how do you look at your personnel and then adapt your system, adapt what you want to do offensively and defensively to your personnel? Because I heard you talk about, we want to put the players in the position where they can succeed, where we're not asking them to do things they're not capable of. So talk a little bit about how you make adjustments year to year and how you get kids to buy into the culture as you start every year fresh with a new team.
Well, I'll go through the first piece is how you get kids to buy in or develop a culture. I think to develop a culture, they have to know what your expectations are, what your standards are, and then you as the coach need to hold yourself accountable to that. And when the players, the young men, don't do what you want them to do, you can't continue to tolerate that. You have to go ahead and explain, if you can't do these things, you can't be a part of our program. And I think when you do that, I think you're going to lose kids, but you're never going to lose the kids that it matters to. And then when you win that over in the 11th and 12th grade and the 10th, it kind of trickles down to the younger kids, because now your juniors and seniors are telling your incoming 9th graders, hey, listen, man, coach doesn't like you. Coach doesn't like you doing that. Don't do that. Don't do that. And so then that shares, and you get that buy-in on the culture. The piece about personnel, I'm a believer in this. I think there's two different frameworks. I think in some schools you can go in and you can build a program and run it however you want, and it's a true program. You have a youth program, you have a solid middle school program, and you have separate programs, separate teams that are part of your program, your freshmen, your JV, and your varsity. I think you can do that in some schools. I also think there's some schools you can't do that. But in both places, I think you can still win. Example, what I feel, what I like to do is this. I prefer to play fast. I prefer for our kids to be able to shoot the ball. I like to shoot threes. I like to get up and down. I like to put as much pressure defensively as I can. And when I say pressure, I'm not talking always full court, but just let people know you got to defend. Now, that being said, we teach it in 7th grade. We teach it in 8th grade. We teach it in 9th grade. We teach it in JV. We talk about these are the things we want you to do. This. We expect our coaches to go ahead and do those things and teach it over and over. When we get to the varsity, though, and we hit the varsity, we will take that style of play, whatever we were doing, and we'll suit it to them. And if we don't have a bunch of kids who can shoot threes, we don't shoot the three a bunch. If we have kids who can't play up and down the floor, we won't play up and down the floor. We teach all that from 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th, and we make them do that. All right. But when we hit the varsity, it's about putting them in the best position to win or lose. And I think that's something that we do well. Now, to do that, I think it takes a couple of years with your coaches if they're new, because it's hard to sometimes run someone else's system completely. Another piece that I think helps when you build a program, I'm one of those guys, I used to be a guy that 20 years ago, here 7th grade coach, here 8th grade coach, this is what you're doing, do this, this, and this, and that's it. And you're going to play all these guys equal, blah, this. And I finally realized, if you do that to your 8th grade coach, you give that guy no chance to coach. So like what I'll tell my middle school coach, my 7th grade coach, my 8th grade, and my freshman coach, here's the rule that we've had. Listen, in the first half, you need to play every kid in the first half. If he's been at practice and they're following what you ask them to do, you need to play them all in the first half. I don't care. We try to play them at least a minimum of 2 minutes. And then the second half, coach, it's your game. Coach, do what you have to do to be successful. Because I think if you don't do that with your 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade coach, what are you looking for? A Boy Scout leader to come out? Why is the guy going to put all kind of time in if you don't let them have a chance for any success? So I think that's part of building a program, letting your coaches, give them a guideline, direct them on a lot of things you want them to do, but I think you got to give them an opportunity to also put their own little, stamp on the program. JV year, our JV program, we kind of do the same thing. We'll tell our coach, instead of playing, if he's got 15 guys, we've tried to limit it to, we'll say you got to play 12 guys. You got to play 12 guys in the first half. And then second half, do what you want to do. And then we get to the varsity, and something that I've been a big believer in recently is, if you got a kid on your team and he can help you play, we play him. So we've been playing 9, 10, 11 guys at Twinsburg over the last couple years, and I think that helps build team morale. And I think those are things you got to do. But there's no one way to build a program. Here's another question to you. Think about this with you guys. What do you guys think about moving players up? Do you think that a program moves guys up, or do you think you should keep them together? What's your guys' view on that? Your freshmen, your JV players, should you move them up?
I mean, I think if your player, I think if a player is is a ninth grader and he's good enough to be a varsity player, then why wouldn't you move him up and have him be a varsity player? Same thing. I just don't see what the value is in having a kid play below their level. I guess for me, I look at that. I experienced that to some degree, back when I was playing. So when I was in 10th grade, I ended up on the varsity at Strongsville, and to a certain degree, it was. I don't know that it happened as frequently back then as it does now. I think now there's less. At least my sense of it is there's less of a strict divide between grade levels today than there was back in the time when I was in school. But I know that, when I moved up, I felt, at times kind of felt a little bit out of place just from, going back to our conversation about coaching staff being friends. A lot of the kids that were on the varsity team at that point, obviously I knew them and we became teammates, but I wasn't necessarily friends with them. And at the time in Strongsville, we had a junior high model. So I was in ninth grade, and I wasn't even in the same school as those kids.
Right.
So, now here I am brand new to the school as a 10th grader. All of a sudden, I'm put on the varsity team. And yet at the same time, despite the challenges, that was obviously the right place for me to be as a player for my development and for the good of the team. And so I think there's no question that if a kid is good enough to be able to play at a certain level, whether it's a ninth grader to play on the JV team, whether it's a 10th grader to play on the varsity, whatever the case may be, I don't think it makes any difference what grade they're in. If their performance on the court dictates that they're one of the best 7 or 5 or 3 or whatever it is, that's where they should be.
And I completely agree with him too. I think I was going to say the same thing about back when. I wasn't there when it was still a junior high model. I was in Strongsville as well, but I was in middle school. But I think back then, at least, it was really hard for them to logistically just think about like having a ninth grader play on the varsity team. It probably was a nightmare. Getting them to the high school from the.
I don't think it ever happened when in the junior high model. I don't think there was ever anybody
right
in Strongsville that had played as a freshman on.
I just couldn't imagine the whole logistics of getting one kid from the junior high to the high school. I just don't see it happening, right?
I don't even think a ninth grader played on a JV team that I can ever recall. I don't even remember it being a possibility. I don't ever remember.
But I definitely think, if the player is ready, why not? And it's why, I don't really want to spend any time going into the whole NCAA discussion about the whole they have to go play for a year in the NCAA, and I know the NBA is looking at getting rid of that rule. But why would you make a kid go to a college program if he's going to play for 1 year and bail? It doesn't make any sense to me. Could you imagine LeBron having to go to school for a year? He would have just destroyed. It would have been great for college basketball for sure. It would have been great, but he would have destroyed them.
Yeah, I agree.
So do you get
about ninth graders playing up and 10th graders playing up? You talk about building a program. I think it helps your program, because if you're a young man coming up through in 7th grade, 8th grade, you're looking and you're saying, wait a minute, David over there, he's a freshman. He made the JV team this year. There's Jamar. Jamar's a 10th grade. He's in the varsity. And I think they see that, and then they say to themselves, listen, I want that opportunity. So I think you get more kids to work harder on their own to hopefully be able to be elevated to play up. And I think that's something that helps building a program. I think when you personally, and my personal view is, I think when you keep all your freshmen together because you say it's a great class, so what? So what? So they go 20, 21-1, and they're all together. What is...
Do you hear negative feedback from the other parents? Let's say we take one ninth grader and we put him up on the varsity. And obviously that's the best kid. So then to those remaining ninth graders and the parents of those ninth graders, is that where you're hearing negative feedback from those people saying, "Oh, why is the kid moving up? If we just kept them all together, they'd really have a lot of success."
Yeah, I think you get it. You get it in both phases. You get it when you have for the most times, I think in boys sports, in boys varsity, I think it's usually a 10th grader goes up. Girls, I think it's always the freshman who goes to varsity. I always correlate that. So you get a JV kid who goes, a 10th grader who goes up and plays the varsity. So now you have some senior and junior parents who sometimes get a little angry and question, why is this young man up? He should be playing here. And so I think they are sometimes very tentative. And then I think you also, on the flip side, I think you get the JV players sometimes and their parents who say, if those two played with us, we'd be 19-3 this year instead of we're 9-11 right now. Instead of thinking, listen, it's beneficial. Your kid's getting a better opportunity to play because those two are up. Because if those two are down, they might not be playing. So I think you see it on both sides. I think you get it from both angles, and I'm not really sure why, but it occurs. But I think you got, as a coach, move them up. I mean, Twinsburg, I moved out. I'll tell you what, I've been there. In my few years there, my first year there, I ended up moving a freshman. Kid came up halfway through the year. The second year, I played 3 freshmen up on the varsity with, I think, 3 sophomores. And, it panned out for us last year in that those freshmen were sophomores starting for me. 2 of them were starting for me as sophomores. The freshman who played for me, he was starting as a junior. And the other sophomore, who from 2 years ago, he started. So I think it made us better. And I think it helped those kids get better. So I'm a firm believer in that. I think it makes your program better.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things. There's sort of 2 competing philosophies there, in that, there's sometimes you'll hear coaches or programs talk about, we want to reward our seniors, the kids who have been around with us for 4 years. And so if a senior and a sophomore, let's say, are sort of neck and neck and even, there's coaches who will say, I'm going to reward that senior. Obviously, again, we're talking if the players' skill levels are pretty even. Right. And then you have other coaches who say, look, if I'm gonna roll with 2 kids who are even in talent, why wouldn't I play the younger kid who's going to be around 2 more years, who I still have time to develop? And I think you can argue both of those philosophies, and see the merit in both. You can see the merit in both of them. I guess for me personally, I would probably tend to err on the side of going with the younger player, simply because if you look at what is going to be best for the program, what's best for the program in the long term is to play that younger kid. And again, that's a hard conversation to have. It goes back to, again, communication with that senior player's parents, and making sure that everybody kind of understands what's happening and why. And that doesn't mean people are always going to be happy. I think that's one of the one of the things that sometimes people don't understand is, when we talk about communication doesn't necessarily mean that I communicate something and then all of a sudden everything's super happy and everybody enjoys the conversation. Sometimes you have communication and you're telling people
you
things
have conflict after
that they don't want to hear. You're telling people things that they don't want to hear. But again, you're heading off much bigger problems down the road. We all know, whether it's in our personal life or our professional life, when you put off difficult conversations, the need to have those conversations doesn't go away. It just continues to get worse and worse and worse. And I've told this story before, but I remember back when we had Steve Frazier, and we were trying to decide at Richmond whether we were going to keep Steve around. Yes. This was like in my, I don't know, probably first or second year, and we debated, we like Steve, he's a nice kid, we should keep him around, and I think we want to have him be on the team. And then we ended up keeping him, and then after that, probably 6 or 7 games into the season, we had a conversation with him. Hey, you're probably not going to play much. Are you okay with that? And of course, he said, yeah, I'm fine with that. And then 6 or 7 games into the season, he becomes just a difficult kid to deal with, because he wanted to play, and understandably, right. Any kid is on the team wants to be able to play. But we learned, I think, from that, hey, you communicate it, but then also you're better off sometimes doing things up front and just saying, okay, well, we know he's not going to play. Let's get rid of him now and not have to deal with it, later. Right. I think as time went on, we ended up where I remember we had seasons where we had like 9 kids on the varsity team, because we thought keeping player 10, 11, and 12 is not really going to help those kids, and it's certainly not going to help us, because they're just going to end up being problems because they're not playing. So I think that's one of the things that sometimes we forget as coaches is that, yeah, we need to communicate, but communication doesn't always end with a happy ending, but at least it makes people understand what it is that we're trying to accomplish with our program.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. And that the subject you just talking about is probably something that runs through my mind more than many other situations in coaching. I always sit here and think, should I keep this young man? Should I have the talk with him? I'll explain to him, here, this is it, this is what I see, and you're very upfront with them. And there's times that, you have to say to yourself, this young man's 17 years old. So even though you're putting everything on the table and you're going through it, he's not digesting it as if he was a 32-year-old. Even when I give you a great story about Eddie Days. Eddie Days, God, he was great for us at Richmond Heights. I mean, wow, what a kid, right? Still doing great things. Eddie, he walks on at Ohio State. I get a call from the assistant coach, and then Thad Mata calls me and says, hey, listen, we're going to offer Eddie a position as a walk-on player on our basketball team this year. He says, Coach, we're going to tell Eddie this is a 40-year decision. Being a basketball player at Ohio State is going to go on for 40 years of benefits for you. He says, Coach, how do you feel Eddie's going to handle this when you keep him? Is he going to understand that he's not going to play? He's going to be a practice guy, because we think he can really make our guards better at practice. And I, of course, said, Eddie's a great kid. He's gonna, he'll get it. Deep down, I know Eddie wasn't going to think that. So I remember getting off the phone. I was right outside the middle school gym, calling Eddie Days, calling him at Ohio State and saying, listen, they're going to come get you. They're going to call for you. They're going to offer you the walk-on position. They're going to ask you, where you see yourself playing. And I said, where do you think? Eddie goes, well, I think I have a chance to start. And so I remember I said, Eddie, when you talk to him, here's what you're going to tell him. And go, that's not why he's going to keep you. Tell him you can do this, this, and this. You're a practice player. Now, you keep working on that, but understand it. And I remember telling him that. And, I remember on the phone, there was a little bit of, he's trying to tell me, Coach, I'm really outplaying guys. And I remember I finally had to say, Eddie, if you tell them that you think you have a chance to start, they're not going to keep you as a walk-on. I said, you got to understand where you're at, make that choice from the time till they talk to you. And of course, he ended up, being a walk-on for them, and it's paid benefits for him today. I mean, he's still, doing things in the basketball world. But yeah, it's a tough thing sometimes, talking to people, telling people things they don't want to hear. But I always like still giving them options if they're available, and then they decide, are they going to fit into your guidelines or not? And then as a coach, you got to deal with the consequences if it goes haywire in 6 games.
Yeah, I think your story about Eddie is is a great one, and Eddie obviously is one of the kids that, if I look back on my time at Richmond, he's one of the players that stands out, not just as a player, but just as a human being, and those
right.
those kind of relationships that you build with kids that enable you to still, have them pick up the phone and call you and say, hey, Coach, what about this? Or, you're giving them advice and you're having an impact. And I think that's one of the things that you've talked about it before, how you learned over the course of time that those relationships are really what is so important. And ultimately, again, we all love to win. If you're going to be successful in any type of athletic endeavor, you better be competitive and you better want to win. But ultimately, I don't remember what our record was in the 97, 98 season, but I remember the relationships. I remember us in the coach's office. I remember the kids that I was able to make an impact on. I think that really is what coaching ends up being all about. And I think you end up understanding that far more the older you get, that you don't necessarily see that when you're younger. Right.
Absolutely. You definitely see it. But you know what? I mean, you hit it on the head. I mean, it comes down to, when I look back, I look back in time, the best years that I had as a coach is when there were the best relationships that were happening, during that time period. Sitting around the coach's office talking about stuff, watching kids stay after practice and shoot around on their own, not wanting to leave. You got to tell them to get out of there. Conversations with them about other things besides basketball. Those are things that, then you're making a difference, and that it's going to benefit somewhere down the line, because that's what it ends up being all about. It's the same thing, But it also is nice to, it definitely, if I were to say that it's not enjoyable to win, I'd be lying.
For sure.
Yeah.
There's no question. There's no doubt about that. Nobody likes to sit through a 2-20 season. That's not. It takes a lot to enjoy that. You still have to keep perspective, but nobody's happy going through seasons like that, for sure.
I'll tell you something. I got to tell you this, because I've done this, 33 years. I've been a head basketball coach. I think I had a losing season my first year at Richmond Heights. My first year when I went to Maple, we had a losing year, my first year. And Amherst, we had one year we won 9 games, so a little under 500. I went to Twinsburg, and the toughest year coaching was my 31st, my first year at Twinsburg. And I think we won 7 games, okay? But I think back to it, and the whole time it was so tough to adjust, because I wasn't used to it. At Richmond, you think back to it, oh my God, Mike, I'd be paranoid about games that we were winning by 25.
Yeah.
Okay, if you remember that.
Absolutely.
I remember we were getting ready to play Columbia, and they were pretty good. And I remember you're saying before the game, I don't know what you're worried about. We're going to kill these guys. And I'm thinking, I don't know what you're talking about. We come into halftime, we're winning like 42-18. And I remember, so I was used to that. Maple, go to Maple after my first year, the minimum games we won were 14. So we were winning there. And you forget about it. You forget about how difficult it is. And that first year at Twinsburg, just the constant change, the not having kids who grew up with you, not understanding what you wanted, not putting in the same time that they needed to. And yet when you're doing that, you got to still try to work within there to change it. And it's I'm sure if we were winning, it still would have been difficult, but there would have been some smiles on Friday night. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it's tough. It's tough. Coaching can be a tough thing, because I'll just say this about coaching: if you want to be liked, you can't be a coach. Like, there's no way. I mean, think about this. I mean, you're going to have conflicts with people, and people aren't going to like you just because you're not playing their son. Kids are going to have trouble when they're younger just because you're not playing them over someone else. It's tough, man. It's tough. You got to be thick-skinned to coach. You got to be strong-willed, and you have to believe in yourself and what you're doing. If you're not doing those things, you're not going to last. I don't care if it's coaching a first-grade team at the YMCA. It's tough to do.
I think that's something that I definitely have learned over the course of my career. I think if I look back to when I was a young coach, I think I was probably definitely someone who wanted everybody to like me. And I think over time, I've come to realize that you have to do, in whatever walk of life you're in, whether it's coaching, whether it's with your family, whether it's with your profession, that you have to do what you think is the right thing to do, and believe in yourself, which is what you just said. And when you do that, you're going to make some people angry and upset, because they're going to disagree with what you want to do. And you can't worry about that. You have to do what you think is right. You have to do what you believe is the proper thing to do for your kids or your employees or your coworkers or whatever the case might be. And when you do that, you're going to make people mad. And yet at the same time, if you're a person who has knowledge of whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's basketball or whether it's your profession, you're going to make decisions that are going to be good ones, because you have the conviction to stand up for what you believe in. And I think that's a great point that you made there. I want to touch on one final subject with you, Phil,
Okay.
and that is, before we get out of here, and that is the opportunity to coach your sons. This is something that I think there's a lot of people out there who are coaches, whether they're, just coaching their kids in a rec league game, or, whether they're a little bit higher up on the basketball hierarchy. But regardless, I think coaching your own kids is, we talked about how hard coaching is. When you throw in the mix of coaching your own kids, makes it even more challenging. So can you talk a little bit about what you loved about coaching your kids, and then what some of the challenges were, and then just how that whole experience went for you?
I would tell you, I think I'm one of the luckiest guys alive, because through all the years that I coached my sons, from the time they were 5 years old through high school, there were so many good times. First, I was very fortunate and lucky that their mother, my wife, she never, ever complained or talked to me about what was transpiring with my sons. Never. From the time we were little guys. The best part about it with me, though, going through, forgetting about the young years, is when it came to high school. My sons both ended up transferring and playing for me at Maple Heights. And it was the greatest thing. The mistake I made is my sons should have played for me both from ninth grade up. And I didn't do that. I didn't do that until they were older. Wish I would have. Both made a big difference for me. I think it helped both my sons. I think it helped me. What it really did too with me is, I know for a fact that the 2 years that my sons were on our varsity basketball team at Maple, there was a complete different type of relationship with the players and myself, with my kids on there. And it was nothing negative. It was just totally different. And that same group of kids, I'm probably closer to than almost any teams that played for us, which is very unique. The piece about coaching my sons, though, I was honest with them all the time. I continually pushed them. I probably went at my sons more than others, but only because I knew what they could take, if that makes any sense. It's great. I mean, as I sit here and think about it, Mike, you hit a sensitive note here with me, because probably the best couple of years of coaching. I would do it again. I've heard horror stories with coaches who've coached your kids. I was a fortunate guy. I mean, even when I didn't coach them, the reason why I ended up bringing them over is they both wanted to play for me the whole time, and I finally brought them over, and it was great. But I also believe that, like, here's the thing that was nice about it. I could talk to them about basketball at any time I wanted, and I knew when not to be negative about it, so that it deterred our relationship. When I talked to my sons about the years they played for us, you can see in their eyes they enjoyed it. So for me, it was a win-win for my whole family. I mean, it was tremendous. It just made everything easy, But I highly recommend it to anyone. I think you got to have the right mentality as a coach. I think you also got to know who your kids are, what they do well. And I think that's one thing that helped me with my sons, in that I was able to distinguish what they do well and put them in positions to be successful. And I wasn't one of those guys that was trying to, change people. When I think about my son, my oldest son, I had two things. My oldest son, Anthony, he goes and plays at Parma. As a freshman, he's a starting little point guard, like 4'10", and then he's playing in 10th grade year, and he sets the school record at Parma for 3-point shots in a season. He comes and plays for me at Maple, and he runs our show. And I had to have a talk with him that you're not going to be able to get off. You're not going to be making 83s this year. Your job is to run the team for us and make passes. And my son completely sacrificed it and ran the team for us. Now, I don't know if I would have said that to a kid if he wasn't my son. I don't know. My other son, when he came over as a junior too, he wasn't in a position to play for me.
And I had an honest conversation with him. I still remember we're driving home from practice, and he said, "Dad, I should be playing above so-and-so from the back seat." And I remember saying, "No, you can't." And he said, "Why?" I said, "Because he's played for me for 3 years, and you're about equal with him. When you're better than him, I'll play you." And he was very angry and didn't talk. And maybe in a couple days, he said, "Well, what do I got to do to get better?" I said, "Beat him out every day." And I'll tell you what, Mike, in 6 games later, I think it was 8 games later, my other son was starting for us and averaging like 10 a game. So I think I was fortunate. I was fortunate. They both played for me. They both were first team, all Lake Erie League, both played. So they did a good job. I was fortunate because they were skilled enough. They understood the game, and they cared about winning, and they knew how to play from the time's up. So it was me positive. I like it.
What do you think? Like, the interesting thing to me that you said there was that you felt like you were closer to those teams that your sons played on than some of your other teams. What do you think about that dynamic of, having your kids in the locker room? What do you think it was about that situation that made you feel closer to those teams? Was it because those kids became friends with your kids and you spent maybe more time with them off the floor, or what was it?
I think that's part of it. I think here's the other piece. I think the players looked at me like, "Hey, there's Anthony's dad. That's Joe's dad." And I think it was I think they were a little more comfortable, if that makes any sense. The players were and I think from that standpoint, they were a little more comfortable. They would look and go, that's just their dad. And then I also think this played a role. They saw me not let them get away with anything. And I think they said, he means it. I'll tell you something, and to this day, I partially blame myself. And this is something, Mike, I wonder if I would do it again. We're playing East Tech. The year East Tech went to the Final Four. We're playing East Tech in the districts, and we're beating East Tech. We are up in the first quarter. We're up like 13-2. And my son Anthony's handling the ball, and things are going well, and he turned it over and he didn't get back on defense. And I kind of chewed him out a little bit and said some things to me. And he didn't look at me. And I called him over, and he kind of blew me off. And I remember sitting there thinking, what do I do? And I put a kid in for him, and I took him out. He came out of the game, and he sat there and he pouted. And his pouting went on, and I waited about a minute and a half, and I walked over and I said, "Listen, so I need you to," he didn't want to look at me. He's sitting back and, acting like a kid. He was upset. And our lead went from, we were up 9 or 10 and we were suddenly down 5 because we had no one to handle the ball. And he still wouldn't change. I wouldn't put him back in. It took about, I'd say 3.5, 4 minutes for him to be able to look back in the eye, be coachable again, and go back in the game. And, I think the players knew I would do that with my own son, so I would do it with anyone. You know what I mean? I viewed him as just another kid on the team. I think that made a difference. And I look back at it, probably if I would have turned my head away and looked away, probably speculation would win. Because even we still were up. We went up 7 at half. We were up in the fourth quarter, and the same thing. We had an issue. We ended up losing toward the end of the game. But I think if I didn't do that, I think we would have beat East Tech that night. But if you ask me would I do it again, yeah, because I think it made a difference in my son's understanding that I'm going to hold you accountable to things. You need to do these things. You got to be responsible and do the right thing. And I think it helped my players that were coming back for me the next year at Maple because they saw, and I think it helped. But, I say to myself, though, if it was the last year I was going to coach, would I have just dealt with it? I don't know, but yeah.
I think coaches that coach their own kids, I think that story you just told is a key for anybody who out there who's getting into coaching their kids for the first time, is that you need to hold your own kids at the very minimum at least as accountable as you hold everybody else. And the reality is, if you want to truly be successful, you probably have to hold them more accountable than the other players, because if you don't, then everybody's looking at your own kid as, hey, you're playing favorites, and when you get into that situation, I think it just breeds negativity. Whereas when you hold your kids to a higher standard, it helps everybody else to fall in line, and that's something that I've tried to do with my son. And again, it's not always easy. It's not always easy to coach them harder, to be tougher on them. But I think in the long run, A, it makes them better, and B, it helps everybody to understand that I'm not putting my kid on the floor because he's my kid. I'm putting him on the floor because I think he can help us win, and I think he's doing things that we want him to do, whether that's be a good teammate, whether that's be a leader, whatever the case may be. You have to be at least as hard, if not harder, on your own kid if you really want coaching them to be successful.
Well, I think about it, Mike. You talk about coaching my kids, and I think about this when my son Joe, when he came over as a junior, I can still remember, he's playing between, I'm going to say 5 and probably 10 minutes a game through the month of December, and I had to do it because at that point in time, he shouldn't have been playing more than that. But he put himself in a position to play more, and it occurred. And that was something I knew I could do. His mom never said a word negative to me about it. So I think it worked out. But it's the one thing I think I did well with coaching them, though, is I didn't, you hear horror stories about coaches really going at their kids more than anything and carrying on too far. I never did that. I never did that. I made sure that I was tough on them, but I made sure that I didn't take it up notches, just to prove points to people out there. But that was because I was confident in myself, was very comfortable in what I was doing, and our team kind of knew who our players were. I mean, there were times, I'll give you an example, you'd say my son Anthony was handling the ball for us. Mike, he would handle it 90% of the time, okay? And this is the kind of team I had. One game, we were playing the sectional championship, and we were up 15, and the next thing you knew, Brush cut the lead down to 2. And I called timeout, and we're coming to the huddle, and I didn't have to say a word. There were 2 or 3 kids on our team screaming at these 2 other players in the team, throw the ball to Anthony, give the ball to Anthony, throw it to Anthony. They were upset because the ball hadn't been in Anthony's hands. His other kid would turn it over. And I knew as a coach, my God, I didn't have to say anything. They knew where the ball should go. And then my coaching piece came. I had to pick that kid up who they were screaming at, telling him, throw the ball to Anthony, quit dribbling the ball. And then I had to come back there. But so for me, it was great. I mean, it was great. It's I look at it. It's if I could do it again, I would do it again. I would recommend it to anyone. I think it works now. I think I wonder what it would have been like though if I would have been coaching my 2 sons and there were players 14 and 15 on the team. I don't know how that would go. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Definitely be it would be a different style of challenge in terms of how you handle it. I think the thing that I pull out of what you're saying is that, and it goes back to the very beginning of our talk tonight, is that ultimately you wanted to help your kids become better basketball players. You wanted them to have a great experience as a high school basketball player. But ultimately, when you come out of that experience, you want the relationship between a father and a son to be intact. And by pushing them hard, but not, as you said, taking it up several notches, where maybe you might have done that and damaged the father-son relationship, you're able to continue to maintain the relationship that you have with them today. And again, that's ultimately what all of you guys are going to remember. When you reminisce with them 20 years from now, I doubt any of you are going to remember what your record was when they were juniors, but you're going to remember the totality of the experience and the relationship that, grew through that process. And I think there's, again, when you're able to interact with your kids in a setting that you love and that they love, I just can't imagine that there's anything better. So it's Phil.
Right.
It's been a complete pleasure to have the conversation. Again, for people out there that are listening, Phil and I have known each other now for going on 25 years, and obviously worked together for a number of years. And so this has been a great conversation that I've enjoyed having. Hopefully you've enjoyed it as well. Is there any way for people out there who have heard the podcast that might want to get in touch with you? Any contact information you want to share with the people before we get out of here?
Yeah, I tell you what, they can email me. My email is psch, M as in Mary, OOK, @gmail.com. Can email me anything, absolutely.
And
One
Phil,
thing I want to say.
Go ahead.
I just want to say, Mike, I tell you, the thing that you do with the camps that you run and everything you've done is it's a blessing to all those kids. And I tell you what, I've seen it. I can remember when you started out, when I first met you and you started doing it. It's been great. The kids, they're fortunate to have a guy like you who cares about them, who teaches basketball, who knows things, who helps them. It's great because there's a lot of people that are involved in this game of basketball I love who aren't about that. They're about just looking at the person in the mirror, and you're not one of those guys, and all those kids benefit. So I hope you can continue success with that. And it's great watching you help basketball grow.
Phil, I appreciate that. I'm so excited that we had an opportunity to have you on the podcast, and I want you to know how much I value our friendship, how much I value our professional relationship, and it's one of those things that no matter where I go in life and no matter what experiences I have in basketball, I'm always going to look back fondly on our years together, and I appreciate you saying those kind things about me. Certainly that's one of the things that I try to do, and I know you're going to continue to have success as a varsity coach for as long as you want to continue to go out there and and pound the hardwood and get it done. So thanks for jumping on.
Sure.
And really appreciate it. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode.
Head Start Basketball's Player Development Academy offers Cleveland area players a unique opportunity to improve their basketball skills. Regardless of a player's age, skill level, or position, training with Head Start Basketball will elevate your game to the next level. Do you want to improve your ball handling, become a better shooter, or develop into a more skilled, confident player? Our Academy classes offer training that's designed to do just that. Our training sessions are innovative and will have you learning skills that are transferable to actual games. We have 4 different class skill levels for boys and girls, ages 4 and up. All Player Development Academy classes will be held at the Strongsville Recreation Center. For more information or to get registered, please visit www.headstartbasketball.com.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, brought to you by Head Start Basketball.